The Last Express. In between developing Prince of Persia 2 in 1993 and The Sands of Time in 2003, Jordan Mechner did two things of note. He produced a short documentary that would ultimately lead to his move into Hollywood, and he also put that talent to use in the development of The Last Express, a rare deviation from platform games. Mechner called upon the animation technique of rotoscoping, used in the first Prince of Persia but on a much grander scale here, which lent it a luxurious feel that has aged much better than the murky 3D PC games of the era. The greatest thing about The Last Express, however, is its structure. The game's real-time flow moves the story along around the player, making it impossible to see everything in a single playthrough, and ensuring that several endings are made possible. Operation Stealth. Released as James Bond: The Stealth Affair in the US, Operation Stealth is essentially the same game, except with a few inconsequential references removed. Or, more accurately, The Stealth Affair is the same game as Operation Stealth, but with the Bond references added, since the game was first published in Europe. An adventure from Delphine, this is a traditional game in terms of visuals, looking more like something Sierra would have produced, but is notable for other reasons, such as the ability to play around with gadgets. Sadly, as a game with the word stealth in the title, Operation Stealth inevitably features a few overhead sections where you have to avoid patrolling guards. A mistake that even LucasArts made with Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis 2 years later. Cruise for a Corpse. Made by the same studio behind incredible works like Another World and Flashback, Cruise for a Corpse may be a different sort of game, but it displays the same commitment to originality and beauty. The adventure gameplay is a bit light to say the least, but that's hardly the point. Cruise for a Corpse is all about the Poirot-style yarn, the immersive 20s aesthetic and those incredible vector visuals, somewhere between animated cells and polygons that only Delphine seemed to do so well. The developer labelled its style as cinématique, a rather apt term that perfectly captures the very French look and filmic techniques that make Cruise for a Corpse as much a visual storytelling experience as it is a game. And in the adventure genre, that is great praise indeed. Discworld Noir. The first two Discworld games are also graphic adventures, and very good ones too, but as a 2D point-and-click adventure starring a wizard and a big dollop of British humour, they're a little too similar to the superior Simon the Sorcerer. Discworld Noir, on the other hand, is equally a good game, but with more original gameplay. The film noir stylings may draw comparisons with LucasArts' Grim Fandango, but this is a different sort of game, eschewing inventory puzzles in favour of clue finding and finger-pointing sequences that perfectly suit the dark detective narrative. As Luton, Discworld's first and only private eye, you collect and save clues only to recall them later to use on suspects and witnesses. It's this mechanic that elevates Discworld Noir above its predecessors. The Fish Files. Most great adventure games are made for a home computer of some sort, with the exception of certain conversions to CD-based systems, which makes The Fish Files a rather strange anomaly. It's exclusive to the Game Boy Color, the most unlikely of places to find a graphic adventure game. Miraculously, however, The Fish Files holds up very well on Nintendo's little 8-bit beauty. The visuals have a certain cartoon quality that outclasses most PC games of the 90s, let alone anything else on the Game Boy, while the gameplay sticks so close to classic LucasArts style that it's hard to believe that George didn't sue. The only thing that lets The Fish Files down is the inexplicable need to spoof X-Files, a cultural touchstone that felt just as outdated in 2001 as it does in 2010. Flight of the Amazon Queen. Though there are no LucasArts games in this list, there are a couple that are so close to that style that they might as well have Ron Gilbert's name plastered across the box. Simon the Sorcerer is one, and Flight of the Amazon Queen is the other. Transparently inspired by Indiana Jones, the game captures the jet-setting adventure and macho humour almost identically. It does lack the style and sophistication of Lucas's own indie games, but the jokes are funny enough and the puzzles strike exactly the right balance between accessibility and the challenge. It's not the sort of game that can be encapsulated by a unique selling point or an innovative gameplay feature, but there's something warm and comfortable about its traditional stylings. I have no mouth and I must scream. Based on the short story by Harlan Ellison, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream tells the story of 5 people who have been trapped and tortured by a sentient computer for the past 109 years. The machine, named AM, constructs a set of virtual morality plays to test the values and worthiness of the 5 characters. Each is forced to make difficult ethical decisions on subjects like genocide, rape and insanity, and will often have to choose between doing the right thing and doing something terrible to help thwart AM. As such, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream sidesteps the usual inventory puzzle dynamic and delivers something altogether more thought-provoking and mature. It remains a unique adventure, and because it was co-designed by Ellison himself, it stands as an example of the innovations that can be made when other types of artists get involved with video games. Space Quest 4, Roger Wilco and the Time Rippers. A huge leap forward for Sierra's sci-fi adventure series, Space Quest 4 thrusts players into a brave new world of point-and-click gameplay, VGA graphics and full voice acting. These huge technical advancements caught designers Mark Crow and Scott Murphy in a reflective mood, and they took the opportunity to rather cleverly take the hero, Roger Wilco, on a time-travelling journey, not through years, but through past and future installments of Space Quest series. Fabricators sequels Space Quest 10, Latex Babes of Estros, and Space Quest 12, Vohal's Revenge 2, are both visited during the adventure, as is the original Space Quest, complete with period EGA graphics and characters who are offended by Wilco's 256 colour sprite. And then there's the narration that takes every possible opportunity to openly mock the hero every time he gets in a pickle. It's a clever premise that could only have been realised with the sudden advance of technology, but Space Quest 4 doesn't move forward in every single respect. Obtuse puzzles and unclear signposting epitomise everything that was wrong with the Sierra's earlier adventures, and Space Quest wouldn't get over these flaws until its 5th instalment, but Space Quest 4 is the most charming and imaginative by far. Leisure Suit Larry, Love for Sale. Creator Al Lowe tells us that Leisure Suit Larry 7, actually the 6th in the series, was his best and funniest work, and who are we to disagree with him? You can tell from the cartoon-like visuals alone that this game is of a rare quality, even now. The humour, as ever, is an acquired taste. If character names like Do Me More, Do Nothing More For You, then you probably still won't get anything out of Love for Sale. But everyone else will find that it tickles that one particular funny bone that can't help giggling every time a bit of innuendo brushes against it. And despite the silliness, this is ironically also Al Lowe's most mature game design, dispensing with Sierra's cursed death scenes and decisions that lead to unwinnable game states. In Love for Sale, the Larry series finally grew up, a triumph equalled only by the fact that the next two games, made without Lowe's involvement, abandoned the adventure gameplay, fumbled with the humour, and alienated every single one of Larry's existing fans. King's Quest 6, Here Today, Gone Tomorrow. Despite being Sierra's flagship franchise, the King's Quest series took years to hit its stride. Debuting in 1984, it featured awful EGA graphics, cumbersome textile commands, and frustrating timed puzzles and death scenes. We accepted it as the norm of the time, but when Ron Gilbert's Maniac Mansion arrived 3 years later, it showed that there were much better ways to make graphic adventure. It took years for Sierra to catch up, but when it did, the results were spectacular. Series creator Roberta Williams teamed up with young Jane Jensen to write King's Quest 6 and produced the single best game in the series. With puzzles and story equally matched in quality, an intuitive point-and-click interface, beautiful visuals, the first voice acting in the series, and multiple routes through the narrative. The King's Quest series continued for another 2 installments and one officially approved fan sequel after this, but it never quite reached the same heights again. The Beast Within, a Gabriel Knight mystery. The Gabriel Knight series, part historical fantasy yarn, part love story, is a series best taken as a whole thanks to the way creator Jane Jensen expertly tells its story across 3 breathtaking chapters. But, despite this, it's also a rather fractured trilogy. Each one uses a different art style, starting with traditional pixels and moving on to full polygon 3D, and threatens to unravel its own integrity as a result. If we had to recommend just one game, however, we go with this second installment, purely because it's one of the only games ever to use full motion video and digitise actors without reducing itself to a laughingstock. With $4 million of development cost behind it, The Beast Within is surely one of the most expensive adventure games of the 90s, but you can feel every dollar there right on the screen and in the script, voice acting and game design. Police Notes. Kojima's second adventure game isn't quite a sequel to Snatcher, but it is a spiritual successor with a similar gameplay and themes. Also set in the future, it tells the tale of a private eye on Earth who is compelled to investigate the case of police corruption and drug trafficking on the space station near the moon after his ex-wife is murdered and her new husband reported missing. As with Kojima's other games, the developer wears his cinematic influences on his sleeve, and in this case, it's the unlikely mix of Lethal Weapon and sci-fi elements that we're treated to. The game is funnier than Snatcher as a result, but it's also equally compelling, Kojima demonstrating an ability to write dramatic stories in ways that he seems to have lost in more recent and convoluted Metal Gear games. Snatcher. While the point-and-click genre is mostly dominated by Western developers, the Japanese are also known for creating adventure games. Hideo Kojima's Snatcher is fairly typical of the style, first-person perspective, story focus, and leaning more towards clue finding and dialogue navigation than inventory puzzles. And it also happens to be the single greatest adventure that Japan has ever produced. Set in a dystopian future version of Japan, it takes influence from Blade Runner and The Terminator, and mixes it with Kojima's flair for dense, encyclopedic storytelling to create a thoroughly compelling and exciting interactive yarn. Sadly, the only English version of Snatcher ever to be released was on the Mega CD, and is now quite rare. If you value original ideas and strong story in your games, however, it's well worth tracking down. Sanitarium. The top-down perspective has more in common with the PC RPG than a traditional point-and-click adventure game, and that should give you some clue that Sanitarium is far from a typical example of this genre. Though puzzles are present and entertaining enough, it's the story and dialogue that makes them so good. In it you play as Max Lofton, an amnesiac who wakes from a car crash to find himself trapped in a desolate, disturbing and ancient sanitarium. As he works to unravel the mysteries of how he got there and who he really is, the game shifts between brutal fantasy world and Max's own delusional subconscious, often blurring the line between the two, to the point where the player never can really trust what's going on in the world. One of the most graphically horrifying and psychologically disturbing games ever produced, Sanitarium was criminally overlooked when it was first released. Thankfully now it's available and playable on modern systems via good old games, so there's no excuse not to give it a second chance. The Longest Journey. The modern age of adventure games, dominated by niche European PC developers, has drifted far from the comedy cartoon adventures of old toward a more realistic, more mature style. For the most part, these new adventures are crushingly dull, but if there's one modern, mature adventure that shrugs off this reputation, then it's The Longest Journey. Taking place between two parallel worlds, the medieval, magic-driven world of Arcadia and the futuristic, technology-led Stark, it stars April Ryan, a girl who discovers that she can shift between the two. April's journey takes her from the relative comfort of Stark into the chaotic, warring realm of Arcadia, and thrusts her into the conflict that changes her life completely. Without spoiling the plot too much, all we'll say is that April's adventure is one of the most gripping and adult tales in gaming that absolutely must be played. The puzzles, on the other hand, some of the hardest ever committed CD-ROM, do the game few favours, but it's worth persevering through them just to experience this unique story. Blade Runner. Created by a studio better known for its real-time strategy games like Doom 2 and Command & Conquer, Blade Runner is one of the few examples of a real-time adventure game. As the player moves around the game world, the NPCs do the same thing, meaning that the player must carefully choose where and when to act. Choice is a huge part of the game actually. There are multiple decisions open to the player at certain points, which can lead to one of 13 different endings to the story, another unusual feature. Released 15 years after the film on which it is based, Blade Runner lacks the input of Harrison Ford, so Westwood decided to use a new character and a new story that ran concurrently with the plot of the film, a smart move that freed up the writers and offered fans a virtual sequel in an interactive form. Star Trek 25th Anniversary. Star Trek's Silver Anniversary, which actually passed in 1990, was celebrated in a number of ways, but it's this little known adventure that we're most fond of. There's a startlingly authentic feel thanks to the appearance of the original cast, as well as the sound effects and visual design that demonstrate a meticulous attention to detail. Interplay's adventure rather bravely incorporates combat elements. Phasers can be used as items to solve puzzles in a rather deadly manner, but the inclusion actually works quite well, faithfully sticking to the lore of Star Trek without unbalancing the gameplay. Furthermore, an innovative episodic structure allowed the developers to tell several stories within one game, much like a TV series, arguably influencing the episodic adventures of today. Beneath the Steel Sky. Though another Charles Cecil creation, Beneath the Steel Sky couldn't be more different to Broken Sword. Set in a dystopian industrial future dominated by depressing high-rise complexes, it shouldn't surprise you to hear that Steel Sky was developed while Revolution was still based in Hull. The cyberpunk stylings, helped by design work from Dave Gibbons of 2000 AD and Watchmen fame, gave the game a unique feel within a genre obsessed with comedy. Throughout the adventure, the player is accompanied by a robotic companion named Joey, who can be used to solve puzzles and upgraded with spare parts. Despite producing 3 Broken Sword sequels, Cecil has sadly never created a follow-up to Steel Sky, but has recently dropped a few hints that he intends to collaborate with Gibbons again in the future. Broken Sword, the Shadow of the Templars. From its incredible opening, in which a clown blows up a Parisian cafe, Broken Sword proved to be a different sort of adventure. It still did comedy and puzzles as well as anything else, but it also demonstrated a flair for cinematic storytelling, likeable characters, and a riveting plot. Charles Cecil's well-researched script, loosely inspired by the 1982 book The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, turned religious conspiracy theory into a clever and enjoyable adventure long before Dan Brown made millions with the Da Vinci Code, and ironically enough, Cecil later found himself contributing to a Da Vinci Code game due to his expertise. Broken Sword remains the superior game, of course, even with the infuriating goat puzzle that was removed from the 2009 director's cut.
Let's have a recap. So, at number 20 we had The Last Express, number 19 Operation Stealth, 18 Cruise for a Corpse, 17 Discworld Noir, 16 The Fish Files, 15 Flight of the Amazon Queen, 14 I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, 13 Space Quest 4 Roger Wilco and the Time Rippers, 12 Leisure Suit Larry Love for Sale, 11 King's Quest 6 Hair Today, Gone Tomorrow, 10 The Beast Within, a Gabriel Knight mystery, 9 Police Notes, 8 Snatcher, 7 Sanitarium, 6 The Longest Journey, 5 Blade Runner, 4 Star Trek The 25th Anniversary, 3 Beneath the Steel Sky, 2 Broken Sword The Shadow of the Templars. And now for number 1.
This homework is really bugging me. I think I'll find the dog and put it in the dryer again. So that's where you are. What's this? Ye oldie spell keep. What a load of old rubbish. Huh?
Okay, guys. This magic paper brings food. I thought I heard something. Aliziggy, Alizaggy, Alizongy, Alizungy.
Hi, how do you do?
Simon the Sorcerer. Simon the Sorcerer is generally considered to be the British answer to Monkey Island, and although it replicated the LucasArts style perfectly, it was the very British sense of humour that gave it its own personality. The clever pastiche of traditional fairy tales spliced with references to pop culture made the adventure one of the funniest games of the 90s, and it became even funnier in 1994 when Chris Barry of Red Dwarf fame lent his voice to the CD-ROM re-release. "17 years later, the game still holds up well, with some tough puzzles and witty dialogue, though a few empty screens drag it out, a problem that was rectified in the equally good sequel. The less said about parts 3 to 5, however, the better.